In this WOR-MASTER video we shall take a look at a recent tournament run by myself and Steve. This was a one-day event with players fighting 3 battles each. Our tournament was located in Worcester, England. Worcester is a typical British cathedral city. Worcester Cathedral is the resting place of King John. And the city of Worcester was also the site of an English Civil War battle. The tournament venue was provided by Worcester War Games, the local friendly gaming store, and is located in the heart of the city. This year we had 16 contestants with a good mix of newer players and experienced veterans. Each round would last for 2.5 hours. And at the end of each round players would total up their victory points. At the end of the tournament, players would be ranked according to their total number of victory points scored. Prizes were awarded to players scoring 1st, 2nd and 3rd place, while the player finishing in last place won a bottle of Worcestershire sauce. We set up one top table at the end of the hall, with other gaming tables set up down either side. In the first round, opponents were drawn at random, but then in 2nd and 3rd rounds, opponents were selected based on their comparative victory point totals. Two out of our 3 tournament scenarios also required the use of objective markers, and many players used the objective markers designed by Cromarty Forge. So if you'd like to purchase your own objective markers, please check out the web store on the Cromarty Forge website, and I'll include a link below. Cromarty Forge was also kind enough to provide us with prize support for the 1st, 2nd and 3rd placed players. In round 1, players were fighting over 5 objective markers which occupied terrain features on the board. At the end of the game, objective markers were worth an additional 200 victory points each to the player. And on the top table, the first random draw was Dwarfs against High Elves, the War of the Beard. Also in round 1 we had Witch Hunters against Norse, Goblins versus Wood Elves, Dwarfs versus Empire, Ogres versus Bretonia, Dark Elves versus Empire, Tomb Kings versus Orcs, and Lizardmen versus Empire. In this game, the Empire has deployed to defend the village against Dark Elf raiders. The Norse army features Ice Wolves as its cavalry units. Empire versus Dwarfs will be a battle of the cannon. Empire Pistoliers managed to capture an objective under the noses of the Lizardmen. Wood Elf Wild Riders manage a flank charge against Goblin Wolf Riders, but suffer 5 hits from the stand and shoot. Witch Hunter infantry finds itself surrounded on 3 sides by the Norse. Empire cannon crest the hill and start to bombard the distant dwarfs. The Bretonnian general is loath to commit his knights against the defended ogres, but has no qualms about sending in a unit of squires to do the dirty work, while the Green Knight leads a cavalry wing around the ogre's flank. The dreaded Cold One Knights crest the hill, supported by their Manticore hero. In response, the Empire Griffin hero calls up his infantry to take cover. The Lizardmen game also features a brigade of Cold One cavalry. The Tomb King artillery take up firing positions, aiming at the Green Tide, while the dwarfs try to bring a unit of Empire Knights within range of their cannon. Wood Elf Dryads start to emerge from the cover of their trees, and High Elf Cavalry charge into a unit of Slayers. The Bretonnian Knight versus Ogres standoff continues, but a unit of Ogres gets the jump on the flanking Bretonnian Cavalry. Meanwhile, the Lizardman Stegodon takes wise precautions against the Empire cannon. Tomb King chariots and Orc cavalry clash over the central hill. The clash is very bloody, with both sides taking heavy losses, whilst the unfortunate Empire infantry finds itself on the receiving end of a Cold One Knight charge. Elsewhere, Norse war-mammoths are herded forward towards the witch hunters. Goblin squig units find that their objective hidden in the Bog of Eternal Stench has now been contested by flying wood elves. Dwarfen infantry jumps out of their defended positions to assault the Empire halberdiers. Bretonnian squires are ordered to charge the waiting ogre lines, but the ogres are hungry and easily beat back the peasant cavalry. A lone stand of Cold One Knights now executes the Pac-Man maneuver down a line of Empire halberdiers. Norse mammoths start to trample through the Witch Hunter army. Empire and dwarfs continue their bloody struggle. Wyverns and a zombie dragon are drawn into the central clash of Greenskins versus Tomb Kings, while the High Elves and Dwarfs seem content to hurl insults at each other rather than engage. The Empire Knights try a last desperate charge to see off the Dark Elf raiders, whilst Lizardmen and Empire continue their struggle at the crossroads. The Bretonnian general finally commits his knights, but they are repulsed by the defended ogres. As the dust settles for round 1, it is the Witch Hunter army which is in the lead, with the Wood Elves closely following in second place and the Dark Elves in third. In round 2, players are fighting over 5 objective markers evenly spaced along the centre line of the board. These objectives can be picked up and carried by units. The top table sees Witch Hunters fighting Wood Elves. The other tables see players matched up against opponents with very similar victory point totals to their own. The nature of the tournament means that even players that scored poorly in round 1 can score well in round 2 and jump up the rankings. On the desert board of this round, we have dwarfs fighting the Norse. Tomb Kings and Ogres fight over the crossroads. The Wooded Valley sees Dark Elves fighting Lizardmen. A classic matchup of Orcs versus Dwarfs occurs over a farmstead. whilst an Empire army moves to defend its own farmland from invading goblins. In the foothills of the Grey Mountains, Empire and Bretonnians clash in a border dispute. Meanwhile, Empire and High Elves fight over buried treasure deep in the Badlands. The dwarfs size up the approaching Norse mammoths and ready their cannon. The Tomb Kings and Ogres waste no time in charging into each other over the crossroads. Dark Elf Cold One cavalry gets a flank charge on their counterparts in the Lizardman army. Empire cannon take up an excellent firing position on the crest of a hill. Wood Elf and Witch Hunter infantry advance through the woods towards each other, with Flagellants getting an early charge against Wood Elf Glade Guard. Dwarf Slayers are eager to take on the Norse Mammoth. Meanwhile, High Elf and Empire Knights charge full tilt into each other. A unit of Bretonnian cavalry manages to break through the Empire lines and charges a unit of cannon on the hill. While on the right flank, Empire Pistoliers and Bretonnian Knights fight over a loot counter. Elsewhere, wave upon wave of brightly coloured squigs assault Empire Halberdiers, while nearby, dwarfs take up defended positions amongst the village of Orc's Drift. The sentries report greenskins to the southwest. Thousands of them. Dark Elves and Lizardmen continue their deadly dance of death. The dwarf cannon have failed to stop the advance of the Norse mammoths. And the Norse also summon a unit of Valkyries into the fray. Empire cavalry takes on wild riders among the woods. The ogres seem to be grabbing all the loot at the crossroads. There is a clash between Empire Knights and Goblin cavalry, with terror-causing characters on both sides. Pterodon riders harass Dark Elf cavalry in the Valley of Fear. In a peak display of Bretonnian chivalry, the sole surviving stand of knights holds onto its loot counter and hides behind the barn. The Wood Elf Dryads now start to grind through the chaff of the Witch Hunter army. Lizardman units manage to make a Dark Elf sandwich. Meanwhile at Orc's Drift, the green tides surge into the Dwarfen defenders. The dwarfs look to their front and mark their targets. Unfortunately for the dwarfs, the orcs have brought along Patrick Swayze on a wyvern. He enters the roadhouse and starts to take out the trash.
I thought you'd be bigger.
Opinions vary.
As the dust settles, the orcs are victorious, grabbing their loot and falling back. Elsewhere, Empire and High Elf cavalry clash, with a hero on a dragon joining the fight. The Lizardmen and Dark Elves play out their final moves, with both sides capturing the loot. The Tomb King general tries a last desperate charge with all his chariots and cavalry into the ogre lines. The Tomb Kings also throw in their zombie dragon, however the ogre general employs the Crocodile Dundee method of controlling the beast.
Out of the way, Dobie!
And the ogres are victorious. On the top table, despite taking initial losses, the Wood Elves manage to recapture all the loot tokens from the Witch Hunters, giving the Wood Elf general a dominating lead. At the end of the second round, the Wood Elves are now in first place, with Ogres in second place and Lizardmen in third. Due to the scoring system, there are also Dark Elves, Norse, Orcs and Empire, all with a good chance of winning a trophy if they score highly in the last round. The final round is a straight up battle with no additional objectives. On the top table, the Wood Elves take on the Ogres. The other competitors are once again matched against opponents who have victory point totals similar to their own, based upon the first 2 rounds. On the desert board we have an imperial civil war between rival elector counts. In the Badlands, 2 rival dwarf clans fight over mining rights. The Goblin army follows the example of Grom the Paunch and invades the elven homelands. The Orc War interrupts some villagers burning a witch. The Slan Mage leads his Lizardman force against the Norse colonists of Skeggy, whilst another Empire army prepares to engage the Dark Elves in the Valley of Fear. And a Bretonnian crusade now invades the crossroads owned by the Tomb Kings. The action starts with Goblin and High Elf cavalry clashing. Bretonnian squires assault skeleton warriors in a ruined village, while the Ogre and Wood Elf infantry lines both advance towards the centre. In this game we learn that ogres do actually eat vegetables as they start to munch their way through the dryads.
Nom, 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 nom.
Elsewhere, Empire light cavalry clashes with the Dark Elf heavy cavalry. Norse Ice Wolves get an early charge against the Saurus lines. The Witch Hunter cavalry gets an early charge against the Orc Boar Boys and Wolf Boys. Whilst in their game, more High Elf cavalry is drawn into the combat against the Gobbos. The rival Imperial factions have also clashed in the centre of their board, whilst the Bretonnian Knights are happy to hold back and let the Tomb Kings come to them. Ogre and Wood Elf infantry continue their clash in the woods in the centre of the board. The Orcs and the Witch Hunters both deploy strategy cards into the crucial combat. The Goblins now unleash their Squig brigades against the High Elf cavalry units, whilst Dwarf and Heavy infantry units clash in the centre of their board in the ultimate grindfest. A Norse Mammoth and its accompanying infantry engage Cold One riders in the village. Meanwhile, the second Mammoth and the Lizardman Stegodon engage in a kaiju standoff.
Let them fight.
The Imperial Civil War ends in a bloody stalemate in the centre. The Witch Hunters and the Orcs have both given each other a bloody nose. The Tomb Kings and Bretonnians have fought each other to a standstill, whereas the Norse general commits himself to combat by joining the Mammoth fighting the Stegodon and ends up losing. And on the top table, the Ogres are victorious against the Wood Elves, scoring more victory points. However, have the Ogres done enough to win the overall tournament? At the end of the third round, the total number of victory points earned by each player over the course of the tournament is calculated, and it is this total score which is used to determine each player's final ranking. This year saw a good variety of armies brought by competitors, and no player ended up playing the same opponent twice. So congratulations to the overall winner, Adam Palmier and his Wood Elves. Also congratulations to second place runner-up, Paul Godbold and the Lizardmen, and third place runner-up, Alex Janaway and the Ogres, whilst the coveted bottle of Worcestershire sauce was won by Philip Carrington and the Empire. I'd like to thank all the competitors for taking part and making the tournament into the success that it was. And myself and Steve hope to see you all again next year.